What is up, Packers fans? Happy Sunday. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can always follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. We today are going to be going over the Packers offensive line and more specifically, how they can upgrade it this offseason, and even more specifically than that, how they can attack free agency, and if there are any free agents that make sense for Green Bay to go after when free agency hits in probably like 20 some days, right around there. It is getting closer and closer. We, of course, have the NFL Combine this week, but I have no news or notes. There's no Packers breaking news to go over today, so we are going to jump right into our topic. And I think the best way to kick this off, the best way to start it, is by going over the current Packers offensive line situation. It would be very difficult for anyone to make a strong argument that the Packers offensive line was bad or even average or certainly below average this past year. Like, they were a good offensive line. I think it's a fair assessment to say they weren't great. I know some metrics might point to that. And I know, the pass blocking win rates and things like that will point to the Green Bay Packers having a fantastic offensive line. I can't quite get there. I think some of the things that you do need to recognize is that Josh Jacobs, from a running standpoint, made some things happen. Like, he went full Josh Jacobs, and even when there were players in the backfield or guys that were not blocked up correctly, he still made Josh Jacobs things happen. So I think that's worth noting. And then at quarterback, Jordan Love is one of the most talented sack avoiders that we have really seen. He is phenomenal at it. He does not take sacks. He is able to use his, quote, silly body to get out of some very difficult situations. And sometimes, to be fair to, or just to be honest about it, sometimes he just gets rid of the ball and he probably at times should take the sack. So I think part of those two things, Jacobs and Love, and some of their skill sets go into not taking sacks and not taking negative runs. And I think that plays into those statistics that say, well, Green Bay's offensive line is fantastic. They don't have a lot of tackles for loss. They don't have a lot of sacks. Well, yes, but you have to put all of that into context. I will say one more time, I don't think there's any way that this is an average, below average, or bad offensive line. I think they're good. I think it's a good offensive line. And I think you feel pretty comfortable with where things are at overall right now. Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Jordan Morgan, Zach Tom. You have 5 starting caliber offensive linemen ready and waiting. And there are a lot, and I mean a lot, of NFL teams that would love to trade out their 5 for Green Bay's 5 right now, as is. Just Walker, Jenkins, Ryan, Morgan, and Tom. There are a lot of teams that would be extremely thankful for the opportunity to take those 5 offensive linemen on. I'm not saying that Green Bay should not look to improve. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be competition, but I do think that Green Bay can feel fairly comfortable knowing that if there was a game today on Sunday, they would be able to put an offensive line out there that should be able to protect Jordan Love and that should be able to get Josh Jacobs the requisite running lanes that he needs to be successful. Perfect? No. Upgradable? Yes. Do you want more competition? Absolutely. Would you love more depth? Unequivocally. Like, these are all things that are fair and true, but you also feel good about your starting lineup if you had a game to play today. Outside of those 5, you have 3 53-man roster backups from a season ago: Jacob Monk, Travis Glover, and Kadeem Telfort. I will put a slight asterisk on Kadeem Telfort, just noting that he is an exclusive rights free agent. He is not officially signed to a contract as of right now. Exclusive rights free agents take care of themselves. He will have that contract done at some point. It is a foregone conclusion, so he is on that list as well. So again, Walker, Jenkins, Ryan, Morgan, Tom as potential starters, Telfort, Monk, and Glover as 53-man roster returnees who are still on this team in some capacity. They have 2 unrestricted free agents, Josh Myers and Andre Dillard. And then they have 3 other futures free agents that are on this team as well along the offensive line: Marquise Hayes and Trey Hill. And then a little bit more of the important one, Donovan Jennings. Many of you may not be familiar with Donovan Jennings. Donovan Jennings was considered to be a potential 6th, 7th round pick last year and was a high priority undrafted free agent. And Green Bay paid him as a priority undrafted free agent, almost like a pseudo 7th round pick. Now, he was hurt during a good chunk of the offseason, never really got to show himself, and then made it to the practice squad for the Packers and spent the entirety of the season on the practice squad. And as far as I can recall, I don't think he was called up through the course of the season. he was, it was once, and he clearly never got in the game, but I don't think he ever got called up. He's an interesting player, sort of fits the Green Bay draft and develop mold to a T. Former tackle in college that's kicking inside to guard in the NFL. Extremely athletic player. Was, I think, in the nines for a relative athletic score, if I remember correctly. He's one at least to kind of keep an eye on. But Marquise Hayes, Trey Hill, even Donovan Jennings, right? They're not making any decisions based off of those players. Anything that you can get out of them is a added bonus at this point. So again, your 5 potential starters, Telfort, Monk, and Glover, and then a couple of lottery tickets after that. That's where your lineup is right now. If you were to stay everything as is, if you didn't re-sign, Josh Myers or Andre Dillard, if you didn't sign any free agents, if you didn't draft a single offensive lineman, you'd probably be looking at Rasheed Walker at left tackle, Jordan Morgan at one of the guard positions, Jenkins and Ryan, one of them at center, the other at guard, and then Zach Tom at right tackle. Kadeem Telfort, Jacob Monk, Travis Glover, and Donovan Jennings would be your 4 depth pieces along the offensive line. And I'll say it one more time, like, you want more competition, you want all those things that we discussed, but it's not the worst situation as is right now, which puts Green Bay in this very interesting situation of you probably don't need to spend like a first round pick. You probably don't need to go out and spend an exorbitant amount of money in free agency to try to upgrade this offensive line. You have young and talented players already on it. It's probably more paramount that these players take a step in the right direction and that you continue to develop the Jacob Monks and the Travis Glovers of the world. But it's not the worst offensive line to have going in, even if they don't make a single addition to this team, which is clearly not what they're going to do. I want to be very clear on that. I'm just saying, if that were to have had to be the case where they couldn't add anything, they still have a quality offensive line that they can go out and play with, like I said, today. That's where the offensive line stands right now. There is, of course, a case for keeping both Josh Myers and or Andre Dillard. Josh Myers has that familiarity with Jordan Love in the offense. He is talked about consistently and constantly by peers and his coaches in the front office as being a consummate professional, carrier of the G, classic Green Bay Packer, and doing everything that they ask him to do along the interior of that offensive line. The checks, the blitz pickups, all of that is super important to what he does. Even sort of the cadence stuff with Jordan, getting those snaps off, trying to get some of those free plays, getting everything aligned correctly. He does a great job with that. However, the tape always leaves a little bit more to be desired. PFF has him as one of their lowest graded centers year after year after year. He's either my lowest or second lowest graded offensive lineman over the last 3 years. It just, on the Packers, I should note, that's not even true. Second or lowest graded player on offense in every year over the past 3 years. So this is a player that you would look at and say there should be room to upgrade that spot. Andre Dillard is a unique player, former first round pick. Green Bay took a flyer on him, saw if they could bring him in. They used him as a depth piece. I don't think it ever really took off. I think they were fine with it. I don't think like Andre Dillard's even grow on trees. It's really tough to find that caliber of a player, regardless of how good you think he is at any point during the course of the regular season. He was probably their 8th or 9th offensive lineman. And if they want to bring that back and do that again, they could. If I were Andre Dillard, I'd probably look for a spot where maybe I had a better opportunity to start, which is clearly not in Green Bay. And again, he's not going to get a starting contract. He's going to have to earn it, but just somewhere where there's a little bit more opportunity for him. But you could add both of those players back. And certainly Myers is going to be, I think, very much in the conversation. There's probably a number where they have in mind for Myers. And if Myers says yes, they bring him back. And if he's above it, they probably say, we wish you best of luck in your future endeavors. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. But we should note Green Bay could try to get either Josh Myers or Andre Dillard back if they so desired. The last thing I want to look at before we kind of look at some of these free agent options is what exactly Green Bay needs at this point in time. The number one thing we talked about, they need depth and competition along the offensive line. They don't really have those depth pieces that you feel comfortable with. As of right now, when we looked at that as-is offensive line with Myers and with Dillard gone, your next guy up is probably Kadeem Telfort or Jacob Monk or Travis Glover, and that doesn't exactly give you a ton of confidence. And you would probably love some competition for those guys that are already starting, whether that be, I don't think Sean Ryan needs it anymore, but maybe Sean Ryan. I think Rasheed Walker could arguably use it, maybe even Jordan Morgan. You always want competition. That's going to breed success. That's going to breed everyone trying to play at their best when there's that competition out there. So depth and competition is number one. You can argue a center, right? Josh Myers, if he leaves in free agency, leaves a gap at center. And Green Bay has options. That is very clear. Elton Jenkins could kick inside to center. I like that, but I think a lot of people like Elton at guard. And when he was at center last year, he struggled with a lot of the snap stuff, which we can take for granted, which Myers is very, very good at. Just getting the ball to the quarterback seems easy. Sometimes it's not. Elton struggled with it. Sean Ryan, maybe he can move over. Is he going to be able to do all the checks at the line of scrimmage and things like that? That's another thing that remains to be seen. Maybe that's the next step in his progression. It's a possibility. Certainly don't think you want to move Zach Tom. And is Jacob Monk ready for it? Jacob Monk was the guy that was like consistently the lone inactive when they only needed to deactivate one player. He would be the guy. He fell behind Travis Glover, Kadeem Telford, Andre Dillard, pretty much every offensive lineman on the roster. I don't know what that means, but it was very clear and obvious that they did not have him, active on game days or have any real thought or desire to get him into the game. And that seemed to kind of fall out of favor from where he was earlier in the season. So that's an interesting one. So you have options there, but as of right now, if Myers is gone, you don't have that real true starting center. You're going to have to sort of either build from within or look in the draft or look in free agency. So there is a little bit of a need there, even if you do have some players who can play that spot. Left tackle, I think still that Rasheed Walker is the guy here, but again, you would love some competition at that spot. Could you add a big time left tackle? Sure. You could do that. Put Rasheed Walker as more of your swing tackle. I think that is something that you could explore. But again, I feel comfortable with Rasheed Walker at left tackle. I think he's a starting caliber player, not an upper echelon starter, but one that you can certainly win with. Maybe not win because of, but I still like Rasheed Walker, and I think he's capable of being a starter on this team. And then the last thing that Green Bay really needs is to look ahead to 2026. Let me start by this, something that not a lot of people have talked about. Elton Jenkins next year is going to be 31 years old. All right, that in and of itself is nothing too noteworthy, right? But he's going to be 31 years old, and he's going to save $20 million of salary cap space if you release him. 20 mil. I think it's a $24 million contract and only 4 dead cap hit. I think, and you save $20 million on it. That's a significant number. Let's just say, for an example, that Green Bay was interested in moving on from that contract, maybe utilizing the $20 million to spend elsewhere. It's possible. If all of a sudden Elton Jenkins is gone, that's one of your key players gone. Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker, and Sean Ryan are all unrestricted free agents next year. I think we all expect the deal to get done with Zach Tom, but all three of them, it is sure, at least it should still be noted that they are unrestricted free agents in 2026 as of right now. Kadeem Telford will be a restricted free agent. And you might say, well, that just means if he's playing well, they'll keep him. But if he's just a backup and you haven't really been able to prove yourself, they're probably not going to tender him a restricted free agent tender and instead make him an unrestricted free agent and try to get him back that way so they can pay him less. And if all of a sudden you were to release Elton Jenkins and you have 3 unrestricted free agents and Telford's not back, all of a sudden, like Jordan Morgan, Jacob Monk, and Travis Glover are your only offensive linemen that are currently under contract next year. And it's very possible that Elton stays, Rasheed gets an extension, or Ryan gets an extension, Zach Tom should get an extension, and it's much ado about nothing. And you don't have to really concern yourself with it or worry about it. But it is noteworthy that Green Bay likes to attack these things before, like the year before, or a couple of years before you need them. This would be the year. Attack it this year, get depth and competition now, and then also have players going forward where if you need them to play because you lose some players, they have the ability to do so. So the needs, just to recap it, depth and competition, maybe a center, maybe a left tackle, and then really looking ahead to 2026. So how should Green Bay address this? Should it be via the draft? Should it be via free agency? Should they look at trades? How would be the best way to go about adding depth, competition, players for 2026, etc.? You look at it and it really, really makes sense to attack this position via the draft for a variety of different reasons. One, you have theoretically 5 starting offensive linemen already. To go out and spend an exorbitant amount of money and a huge contract on a free agent offensive lineman may have some diminishing returns because now you're taking a starting caliber player and putting them on the bench, which is not the worst thing. It's great to have that depth, but it may not be the best way to utilize your resources. Maybe it is, but it's at least a question mark, right? So draft and develop. Draft and develop. I don't think there's a trade out there. So build, you have your baseline offensive line now. You have a question mark of what's going to happen in 2026. So let's start building up that offensive line so you have the depth and competition now, and you have the bodies if you need them in 2026. The draft really does seem to make a ton of sense. You're not going to sign, and this is what we're going to talk about in just a second with these free agents. It's hard to imagine signing a huge free agent offensive lineman, right? They have 5 capable starters already. So to give a massive contract to a new offensive lineman, I wouldn't hate it because I think the trenches are that important, but I don't expect Green Bay to do that. I don't maybe think it's even necessarily the best use of resources given what Green Bay has. You could look at signing a value free agent, but then you're not going to necessarily trust them. And all of a sudden feel like, oh, yep, problem solved. We have all the depth that we need. So that is why for me, the draft does actually make a ton of sense for how to attack just depth and competition along the offensive line. And then, of course, addressing future needs as well. But this is not a offensive line draft episode. This is a free agent episode. So while I'm prefacing this by saying I think it's actually smarter for Green Bay to attack it via the draft, let's look at some of the available offensive linemen and see which of these players could potentially fit in Green Bay. Some of these I'm going to go through lightning quick. Others we're going to go through a little bit more in detail. The top 100 PFF free agents, there are multiple offensive linemen on that list. Just to kind of go through it lightning round. Trey Smith, guard Chiefs. There's just 0.0% chance that the Packers get involved in this $25 million bidding war for a guard. It's just not in Green Bay's, I guess their plans or their MO. It's just not who they are. It's not in their DNA, probably the best way to put it. Ronnie Stanley, offensive tackle, Ravens. Again, they're not going to go out and spend big money on a older left tackle. I don't even know that I'd really rather have Stanley all that much rather than Rasheed Walker at this point. So just 0% chance. Same thing with Cam Robinson, offensive tackle for the Vikings. We talked about Drew Dahlman, the center for the Falcons. Really fun player, like really athletic, good tape. Some deficiencies there. Like he's not the strongest dude in the world. He's not a mauler, but unbelievably athletic, gets to his spot, seals off well, and is a value add as a run blocker, and certainly improved this past year as a pass protector. Here's the issue. Greg Rosenthal recently reported that he's going for potentially $20 million per year, which is just bananas money. Should not happen that way, but here we are. And if it goes anywhere near that, to me, that would be a hard pass for Green Bay. Will Freeze, again, guard, probably going to get too much money that Green Bay is going to want to spend, especially at guard. Again, not what they do. Tevin Jenkins, I'll spend a second on in just a little bit. We'll talk about him in greater detail. Kevin Zeitler, they're not going to want a older guard that is a stopgap. They just don't need that. Same thing with James Daniels, the guard from the Steelers, Tyron Smith, the tackle for the Jets. Mekhi Becton, we'll talk about in just a moment. Alaric Jackson, we talked about the other day. We'll talk about him again in just a moment. Dan Moore for the Steelers. Again, I just don't see what that actually brings you at this point in time. It's not the right use of money or resources. Morgan Moses is too old. Brandon Sheriff is too old. I don't see Patrick McCarry fitting. Jedrick Wills, we talked about and will again. Aaron Banks for the 49ers just hasn't been good enough. Will Hernandez, I think, signs with a team to be a starter where he doesn't have to compete somewhere. And then you have Ryan Kelly and Coleman Shelton, who we'll talk about as well. I'm going to narrow this down to about 9 offensive linemen that I think could make sense in some capacity. I'll start with Drew Dahlman, who, again, we talked about. The money is probably going to make it absurd and not worthwhile and something that Green Bay should not do. But we should at least mention he would be a very good fit at center on this offensive line. He would be a clear upgrade. It would just take a pretty significant investment from the Packers. And I'm just not sure that that's the right direction to go at this point in time. And that's where you want to put those resources in Drew Dahlman from the Falcons. Tevin Jenkins for the Bears, 4 seasons, 2,205 snaps. It's been a big issue for him just to stay on the field. 160 snaps his rookie year, 576, 731, 738. Just can't stay healthy through the entirety of a season. He did have a pre-draft workout in Green Bay, which is the only reason I'm really bringing him up, is because Green Bay does tend to like their pre-draft free agents, even if they have to get him a few years later. He knows the division. He's a very good player when he is on the field. Great athlete. His PFF grades the last 3 years, 80.7, 72.6, and 75.4, and he's still only 27 years old. So a fun free agent. Don't see Green Bay going in that direction, but if they did, he would easily compete at one of those guard spots. You're probably guaranteed to kick Elton inside then, in which case you would go with like a Tevin Jenkins at guard with probably Rasheed Walker and, Zach Tom at tackle, Elton at center, and then you're probably looking at Sean Ryan and Jordan Morgan battling out at guard, or Ryan wins it and it's Jordan Morgan and Rasheed, Walker battling it out at left tackle. Different options there, but that would probably be the case. I just don't see it likely at this point in time. Mekhi Becton, guard for the Eagles, coming off a great season, 6'7", 363. again, this is not usually the type of player that Green Bay sort of attacks here. They don't spend big money on guard, and they usually don't like these 6'7", 363-pound guys. They'll take one in like a Caleb Jones or a Kadeem Telford, some of these bigger guys, not quite that big for at least Kadeem Telford, but that's usually not the player that they're going to spend money on. It's not their type of offensive lineman. They want a little bit more well-rounded, although Becton had a great season last year. 26 years old, 70.7 grade. Just think he's going to get paid by some team pretty significantly, and I do not expect it to be Green Bay. Alaric Jackson, tackle for the Rams, 6'7", 345. We talked about him the other day, and a couple of these we're going to coming up here in our potential value free agents or under the radar free agents for Green Bay. Can play guard and tackle, 78.4 PFF grade this past year, 2-year starter, former undrafted free agent, still only 27 years old, really good player. I just think some team is going to know how good he is. Like everyone's going to know how good he is. And there's going to be some team that gives him a significant contract. I'd be pretty stunned if that was Green Bay. He fits the timeline. I do think he'd be an upgrade over Rasheed Walker, but not significantly so to give this huge contract to him. I think that's going to be the tough selling point here. Jedrick Wills, offensive tackle for the Browns, 26 years old, 6'5", 307. He's only played left tackle, but I do think he can play right tackle or either guard position. That's how he kind of profiled coming out of the draft. Former 10th overall pick, 52.9 PFF grade on 245 snaps this past year. Injury issues. He's your Andre Dillard 2.0. Former first-round pick that didn't work out, got some time starting, just never could really have it click, had some injury issues. Green Bay gives him a flyer on a cheap deal to come in and be a depth piece for now and see if he can find a permanent spot, kind of like Mekhi Becton did with the Eagles last year. I would love a Jedrick Wills signing on a cheap 1-year deal, but I don't know if it gets to that point. But if it does, I think Green Bay could be interested and probably should be interested in that scenario. And then 2 centers, Ryan Kelly for the Colts and Coleman Shelton for the Bears. This would be if Green Bay, like let's say they lose Josh Myers, they're not going to go and spend big money on Drew Dahlman. And they decide, you know what, we really want a center. We're not going to move Elton Jenkins. We're not going to move Sean Ryan. Jacob Monk's not ready yet. We want a center. All right, well, Ryan Kelly, former first-round pick in 2016, 32 years old, has missed some time in the last couple seasons due to injury, but he's at a 77.2 and a 67.0 PFF grade during that time. He's an upgrade from Myers if he's healthy. He would probably go for a decent, reasonable contract. I don't expect him to break the bank. And if Green Bay wants a center, Myers is gone and they don't feel comfortable with it. Ryan Kelly, same thing for Coleman Shelton. Is he the perfect 1A center? No. 6'4", 300. He's going to be 30 in July, 66.1 and 66.4 PFF grades. He's solid. He's fine. He's not going to win you games. He's not going to lose you games. He's just going to be good, do your job, lunch pail mentality kind of guy. Similar pass blocker as Josh Myers. He'd be an upgrade as a run blocker, and he does give you some guard and center versatility as well. So if Green Bay loses Myers and they're sort of on the market still for a center, Ryan Kelly, Coleman Shelton could make sense. 2 other smaller names. We talked about Dylan Redunds the other day as an under-the-radar guy, offensive lineman for the Titans, 6'6", 301, second-round pick, 53rd overall, swing offensive lineman, can play multiple spots, and still only 27 years old. Hasn't had a great career in Tennessee. This would be more of a value free agent signing. Hopefully that it clicks in Green Bay and you can get a little bit more out of him. And then I'm going to throw you one more crazy name because that's exactly what I do. And we leave no stone uncovered, right? Or undug up or unchecked, whatever you want to say. Ryan Nuzil, center for the Falcons. He's a restricted free agent. I don't think he gets a tender, which will make him an unrestricted free agent. This is the most Packers thing ever, right? There's usually some guy that maybe they didn't get the restricted free agent tender picked up or just kind of a vet minimum signing where you're like, who the heck is that guy? I could see Ryan Nuzil, if he becomes available, being that guy. Started some games for the Falcons last year, has some things to clean up, but didn't completely not look the part by any means. 27 years old, was an 8.90 relative athletic score guy coming out of college. Appalachian State is where he played, had huge agility and speed numbers, which Goody loves. 6'2", 301, seems like a very, very Packers move if he were to become available. Just a flyer, back of the roster sort of free agent signing who maybe in a pinch could start at center, or maybe if he takes a step could start at center. I could see him battling out with it, Jacob Monk or maybe one of those other guys, Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, etc. But it would be a under the radar sort of complete out of nowhere signing that maybe could pay some dividends. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a 1-year vet minimum if they get him. But I would love that for Green Bay if you could get him on a 1-year vet minimum, anything like it. So those are my 9 offensive linemen I think you should keep an eye on if you're Green Bay. Drew Dahlman, again, if the price is right and Green Bay loved him, maybe. Tevin Jenkins, would have to, again, be the really right scenario. He'd have to like, maybe want to play in Green Bay and like specifically. And, Green Bay would have to go back to that pre-draft visit. And maybe there was something there that both sides really liked. I don't see it, but not impossible. Mekhi Becton, again, super unlikely. I think you're looking for that next project rather than paying the guy that just had a nice season in Philly with a really great offensive line and staff around him. Jedrick Wills, we talked about. Alaric Jackson, probably too steep, too pricey. Ryan Kelly, Coleman Shelton, Dylan Radunes, and Ryan Newsel. Those are your players that I think Green Bay actually could consider. Here's the thing. Do you really want to just count on the draft, right? Do you really want to go into the draft being like, all right, we didn't address offensive line at all in free agency, and now we're going to have to get some guys to really have the depth here that we feel comfortable in? That's a tough sell. So I think you might want to do something in free agency. Now, it's hard to find them to, anyone that would make any sort of sense to spending huge free agent money. But again, if you spend nothing, you're not going to get anyone that you feel is like a real upgrade as a backup player at all. So they might need to spend a little bit of money here if they actually want another capable starter who can come in a pinch and play maybe a variety of different positions. That's what you're looking for. Finding it's an entirely different battle altogether. So hard to see him spending money or huge money on the position, but it's also, again, hard to find a value free agent that's going to make a ton of sense. And you're going to have to figure out this no man's land of not wanting to spend a ton of money, but not having someone in experience that you can't count on. That's what's intriguing to me. So to me, if I'm Green Bay, I could see them maybe going for one of those centers, just getting another starting capable player in there, whether that is Josh Myers, whether that is Ryan Kelly, whether that is Coleman Shelton. I think there's some options there. Go get a center, help yourself a little bit, and then build via the draft and maybe take 2 or 3 offensive linemen through the course of the weekend or Thursday, Friday, Saturday when we get to draft time, and hopefully hit on a couple. Green Bay's been one of the best draft and develop offensive line systems in the NFL. Let's see if they can continue it, give them some raw, balls of clay, and see if they can actually go out and deliver on it and really make it that they continue this draft and develop process with some of these very talented and young offensive linemen. All right, so that's where we kind of leave off. And I think just to kind of recap it, there's not a big time free agent that makes sense. I think you can find some value free agents, but do those value free agents really move the needle for you? And then do you want to have to spend aggressively in the draft to go out and make sure that you have the depth and competition in future that you need? I think that's still the best way to view this. But if I'm Green Bay, I'm really considering taking one of those centers, or at least getting another potential starter who can come in and compete, and then grabbing a couple more players in the draft, and then really allowing the positions to kind of compete with themselves, which would be a beautiful thing if you're the Green Bay Packers, and especially having that depth if somebody does in fact go out of a game at any point in time. All right, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate you guys a ton. You can follow me again at Andy Herman NFL. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, give those 5-star reviews. We appreciate that stuff a ton. Most hated Minnesotan, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Alex Wong, Ronaldo Espinoza, Peter Ataka, Jay Zimmerman, B. Brown, Puerto Rican Packer, Dan Guestford, Step Keat, Dylan Patscott, Bobby Santoro, SoCal Pat, Chris Rager, Izzy Roberts, Ian Ewing, and Razul Douglas time. I appreciate you guys being Hall of Fame and All-Pro members. I'll see you guys tomorrow, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.